Happy birthday, Graham! I hope you enjoy the creepypasta I've wrote for your birthday and that it's not a letdown that I made a dub with my limited English.
Let's play Psykiller. Well, what should I play today in the stream? Linus asked himself. He looked at the offers on the PlayStation Store. He wanted something surprising for his next stream. He leaned towards doing a blind run of a game he didn't play before. Linus often did things like that on his Twitch channel Indie Game Nerd. He always avoids mainstream games. His Let's Plays were meant to show hidden gems, no matter if he played an RPG, point-and-click adventure or a horror game. Every Let's Play was supposed to avoid mainstream games. For this purpose, Linus looked for special titles that sounded promising. Then he saw something interesting. What's that? Psykiller sounds interesting, Linus said to himself. He had the habit of speaking to himself when he looked for games. Let's see what the description says. You are an occult serial killer and must build a murder pentagram in every level. The kills have to be done by summons based on either their fears, their sins or their traumatic memories. But be careful. For every pentagram you have 1 hour. If you miss this target, you will be chased for 1 hour by your own sins. The explanation sounded promising to Linus. This could be a cool mindfuck or total crap. Both are possible. That's good for a surprising title. Let's see how it works in the stream. I'm curious. I never heard anything about this title, thought Linus. He checked if he knew the developer. The Terror Saint doesn't tell me anything. It seems to be a new team, he thought. He definitely was curious and started the download. Then he cooked something and prepared today's stream. Welcome to Indie Game Nerd, your channel about games out of the mainstream. I found an interesting title that I'm going to play in a blind run. The name is Psykiller and I didn't play any second of it yet. I'm as curious as you are. Linus greeted the audience. Then he started a little intro before he started the game. Linus explained after the intro that it's a completely new game and that it looks like this developer's first game. He explained the premise from the description. Then he asked if someone from the audience already knew something about it, but no one responded, so he started the game. After he started the game, a short explanation of the goal was given. After that, the city appeared from a top-down perspective. It was rendered with a comic book look. Linus couldn't help it, but the city looked familiar to him. Well, I have to kill 5 persons in 1 hour in a creative way. If I miss that, I will be chased by my sins for 1 hour. It seems like I choose my victims from the top-down menu. That's a lot of people. Looks pretty expensive for an independent game. Seems to be an entire city of people to choose from. Let's look for the first victim. Linus brushed the cursor over many people, either walking the street or standing in the windows. Above every person was a short explanation with their name when he moved the cursor over them. A woman named Vanessa Meinhardt got his attention. The description marked her as a bitchy person who casually made nasty remarks about others. He clicked on her in the top-down menu. The game then changed to a first-person perspective. Vanessa walked along the street on her way home and he followed. Then he noticed that his avatar was invisible. Linus collided with some people and they fell to the floor while he stalked Vanessa. They all were surprised. No one of them could see anybody they could possibly collide with. This caught Vanessa's attention as well as some bystanders. But no one paid attention to Linus. Vanessa seemed restless after something like this happened behind her a few times. She quickened her pace. Linus stayed on her heels. There was a feature that he liked. If he came within 2 meters of her, descriptions of her fears, sins and painful experiences appeared, but she also became more restless. Apparently, she sensed his presence when he was too close, so he had to be careful if he wanted to catch her. He followed her to her apartment, where she quickly entered. She closed the door behind her and Linus couldn't just follow her. Then he received advice. A text window in front of him said that he could build on the information about her so far. He could learn more about her on that point by listening at the door. Linus decided to find out more about her obsessive hygiene. During the pursuit, he had learned that she had an obsessive-compulsive disorder in this regard and that she was incredibly afraid of germs. It's really interesting. That way I can learn more about their weaknesses. It looks like she doesn't just fear germs, but also the rats that transport them. Let's see how we can take advantage of that, he said to his audience. Linus looked for his options. Then he was offered to have the rat flap break, which blocked access through the toilet for rats. He accepted the offer and was offered whether he should slip into a rat body to get into the apartment. He did so and broke into her apartment. When he was in her bathroom and saw that the door was open, he went through it. He was told that if he scared them and he could kill them that way, his power increased. So he looked for her briefly, knowing that she was afraid of rats. He then saw her in the living room, where she looked worriedly through the window. He was given the option to beep, and he did. Vanessa was startled and saw the rat. She screamed and had a panic attack. She climbed on a chair to increase the distance to the rat, because the room only had one door in which the rat Linus was. Suddenly, Linus' rat body grew. Cool. If I scare her, I'll grow and attack her. I find the idea interesting, he told the scream. When she saw the rat grow, she couldn't believe her eyes. It increased her fear and Linus received another growth spurt. When he was about the size of a dog, he pressed the attack button indicated to him and the rat jumped at Vanessa. She literally mauled Vanessa and after her death, a notice came up. Congratulations, you have 1 of 5. Time used 11 minutes. On to the next victim. Linus pressed continue and suddenly the image changed for a few seconds, from a comic look to a film sequence, in which the killing of Vanessa was shown again with real actors. Wow, awesome feature. In the comic look, the whole thing still looks halfway harmless, but that's tough. Looks gross like she was killed. Compliments on the special effects. That was really a tough jump scare. I'm not quite sure if I think that's cool. After the sequence he came back to the top-down view. Now he noticed a minute counter in the lower left corner. It showed elapsed time. 11 minutes. The sequence was apparently not counted. In addition, the screen now showed one part of a red pentagram. His progress was indicated to him. Well, if we take now, I have to hurry, otherwise I still have problems at this level. Linus was looking for the next victim and hoped that he could do the next kill differently, so that it would not be too repetitive. His attention fell on Erik Vogelsang. His description said he was an arrogant company boss who treated his employees like scum. Linus felt called to teach him a lesson. Today you will atone, Erik. Let's see how we get you. Linus now spoke incited to a scream. He was starting to enjoy the game. He chased Erik, who apparently didn't let himself be disturbed that quickly, even if he looked around when Linus was close. He learned of Erik's sin. This criminally neglected the fire protection regulations and disguised this with bribes. Nobody in his company knew about it. Erik was apparently also on his way to his company. Anyway, he entered a warehouse and went into an office there. Apparently dangerous goods that were easily flammable were stored here. That made his behavior worse. Let's see if I can cause a fire death for him. As soon as Linus had said this, the game indicated that Erik's escape routes had to be blocked first. Linus looked around. He spotted a fire door at the back of the office. He went outside to see if there was any way to block it. He spotted some barrels that looked heavy and moved them to the door. There was currently none outside, so that no one saw him. Nobody could hear anything either, as there was a lot of noises in the warehouse. There was a lot of activity there. Linus went back inside and looked at what still had to be done. He saw a couple of barrels with dangerous goods in front of the office and saw a welding machine in the distance, which a worker had lying next to him. The worker was called briefly by his foreman and Linus took the welding machine. Then he went to the barrels in front of the office and opened a screw cap, then knocked over the barrels of chemicals. A puddle spread outside the office and the company boss was about to see what had happened. Then Linus activated the welding torch and set fire to the chemicals. There was an explosion that threw Erik back into his office. He was badly injured and was barely able to move, but he was still conscious. The alarm went off and the staff fled. None of them were injured. They couldn't get into the office to help the boss. The whole area in front of it was on fire, and the flames now penetrated the office as well. Erik burned alive. Well, the boss must have grilled it there. In the next life, you should pay more attention to the fire protection regulations. Again, Linus received a notice with 2 of 5 kills and 19 minutes had been used. So he had 41 minutes for the rest. When he clicked on continue, another death sequence came up. There you could see Erik's agonizing death where he screamed horribly. Dude, somehow I find these sequences too much. All due respect to the special effects and the actors, but that really hurts me. I think that's a bit sick. At first, I found the game very interesting, but slowly it sinks in my favor. Feel free to write to me in the chat what you think about it. Since Linus wanted to finish the level, he went on. Somehow he was amazed. The city looked familiar to him, which was presented in a comic look. Even when the game was starting to get scary, he kept going. His next goal was an animal abuser who kept beating up his Rottweiler. He loosened the dog's leash once and got him to attack and kill his abusive owner. Here too came one of the disgusting sequences. In the chat there were now more voices who found the game sick. Linus was still wondering how an independent studio could do something like that. The effort was already high when there was such a scene for every victim. Then he had a first dark suspicion that the game is not so much a game after all, but he rejected the idea as he did not believe in supernatural things. So he looked for his next victim. He had 25 minutes left. His choice fell on a junkie who regularly beat up his girlfriend and child before they were housed in a women's shelter. He lured this man into a dilapidated house with the promise of the next shot, where he fell through the rotten wooden floor into the basement. There was broken glass and used injections everywhere, from junkies who had previously shot themselves here. The junkie bled to death and there was another video sequence. As much Linus wanted to convince himself that it was just a game, he still had a queasy feeling in his stomach. He had 12 minutes left. He was looking for his next victim and then he got a shock. In the view he got to see a person who looked familiar to him. She was very familiar to him, even in the comic look. He moved the cursor over her. There was the name Lisa Runke. That was the name of his older sister. Shit, what is that? Somehow it seems that there's no game in front of me. Now, Linus took another look at the city. It was Oberhausen, the city in which he lived. It couldn't be a coincidence. Did he really kill some people? He couldn't believe it, but then he became aware of alarming messages in the chat. That it was reported that a fire in a warehouse in Oberhausen was currently big in the news. Many seemed confused in the chat. Some also blamed Linus. They didn't believe in a coincidence either. Linus switched on the news and found out that a warehouse in Oberhausen was actually on fire. There was also a victim there, CEO Erik Vogelsang. Linus' eyes widened. That was too much for him. What the fuck is that? This cannot be! Something like that is not possible, he stammered. Suddenly, there was an alarm from the game. Linus only had 5 minutes for the last victim. "You can forget that, you dirty game. I never wanted to hurt real people or even kill them. I'll cancel the game now." Linus wanted to turn off his PlayStation 5, but it didn't work. It didn't respond. It stayed on even when he unplugged the power cord. He couldn't turn off the television either. Then in his desperation he got a hammer out of his toolbox and wanted to smash the console. But an invisible wall seemed to protect it. He couldn't hit it. Suddenly the message appeared on the screen that Linus had not made all the sacrifices and that he was now being hunted for an hour. In addition, as a special punishment, his sister would be persecuted for not continuing the game because of her. Linus just stood there in shock. Was this really happening right now? How could that be? First he needed a clear head, but then he heard something. He turned and saw his first victim. It was a horrible sight. It was half mangled and looked totally grotesque. "Why did you kill me? I never did anything to you. You didn't even know me, and still you set that rat on me. Now it's time you got to know a few rats yourself." Behind her, a whole horde of rats came pouring towards Linus. They slowly circled him and were about to attack him. Linus saw no opening through which he could escape. There was only one escape route, a window behind him. Also, he was on the second floor. He rather risked injuring himself if he fell than being mangled by the rats. He opened it quickly and jumped through. Several rats hit him and bit him, but he escaped from the apartment. He was lucky that there were some bushes under the window that dampened his fall. He got away with a few cuts, bruises and bite wounds. But there was no time to rest. The rats would surely follow him, so he ran to his sister's house. The warning had been clear, he had to save her. It was a long way to run, but the adrenaline gave him the strength to keep running. He didn't have a car and he didn't want to take a bus or a taxi. He could be attacked at any time. It was some time before he got closer to her house. He hoped Lisa was fine. So far there have been no further attacks, but shortly before her house a mangled man stood in the way. Linus slowed down. He knew it was the animal abuser that he had on his conscience. "So, you are the little shit who set my own dog on me. Now is the time for you to get to know some dogs yourself." Suddenly, some Rottweilers appeared around the undead animal tormentor. They bared their teeth and Linus ran away. He couldn't win this fight. The dogs immediately took up the chase. They were quick. In the long run, he couldn't escape. So he jumped up a nearby tree and climbed it. The dogs lurked below. He had to go to Lisa and he didn't know when the next attacker was coming, so he needed an idea how to escape the dogs. Fortunately, he was on a tree where the branches extended to a flat roof. He climbed up and took a risky jump. 2 meters already separated him from the roof and he could not make a run up. Luckily, the treetop was much higher than the roof and he just managed to land on it. Linus had to take a deep breath but was terrified and the dogs were still lurking below. He noticed he had sprained an ankle. Racing would be a challenge now. He looked around briefly to see how he was getting on. Luckily, there was a backyard that was walled around. He could go down there without being attacked by the dogs. He climbed down a gutter and continued on his way. There was a fence at the far end of the yard through which he could see. He checked if the dogs were still following him. As it wasn't the case, he stepped through a gate and started running again, despite having a sprained ankle. Worrying about his sister made him forget everything else. Linus ran through the back alleys and approached Lisa's house again, when he heard the dogs behind him. He rushed as hard as he could, otherwise the animals would tear him apart. Finally, he was at her house. Her property was surrounded by a high wooden fence. He toppled the door on the fence and closed it right behind him. As he closed the door, he heard the dogs jumping against it. They really wanted to go through and grab their prey. He had just made it. Then he went to her door and opened it. Fortunately, he visited her often and had a key to her house. Lisa, are you alright? He shouted, extremely worried. Nobody answered him. He imagined the worst things and kept calling for his sister. He ran through the rooms and repeated his call. Nothing could be heard or seen from his sister. But suddenly he met the other two victims for whom he was responsible. There you are. Just burned me off in my office. That wasn't cool. That was actually really uncool. I think I have to show you how uncool that was, said an extremely bad-tempered Erik Vogelsang, whose skin was completely burned, and suddenly a fire started around him. The house became a death trap. Erik, leave me something too. It also sucked to bleed to death in the basement, said the junkie, who was covered with cuts. Suddenly the windows of the house shattered and the splinters flew towards Linus. He threw himself on the ground and put his arms over his head to protect himself. Most of the splinters missed him, but some hit and gave him lots of small cuts. He also felt a surge of heat over his back. The sudden supply of air had triggered a roller of fire. If he hadn't thrown himself on the ground, he would have been burned. The adrenaline pumped into Linus and he jumped up again. To get out of the burning house, he jumped through a window into the garden. There finally was Lisa. Lisa, you are here. I hope you are alright. Tell me, are you okay? Lisa said nothing and slowly moved towards Linus. She pretended as if she wants to hug him, and he replied. Then suddenly he felt a great pain in his left shoulder. She had a knife in her hand and stabbed him with it. She had pulled the knife out and was about to stab him again. Linus reacted immediately and held her arms so that she couldn't attack anymore. Damn, Lisa, what's the matter? Why do you want to kill me? Said a desperate Linus. Meanwhile, Lisa tried to free herself. She pulled him down and kicked him. With a heavy heart, he hit his sister in the face, who fell down and held her nose in a daze. Dude, Linus, are you really beating your own sister? Said a deep voice behind him. Linus turned around and looked where it was coming from. He couldn't see anyone wherever he looked. Then suddenly a dark figure appeared. It was darker than the night. He could only make out the outlines. Contours on the face or other features could not be made out, it was so dark. Who are you? What are you? Who am I? I am the Psy Killer, answered the creepy figure. You are the Psy Killer? Are you this cruel game? Yes, I am the game. What did you do with my sister? Why did she attack me? Are you behind that? Yes, I influenced her. As my name suggests, I got psychic powers. With them, I was able to influence her telepathically. I showed her what you did with your victims and was able to convince her that she will be your next victim if she doesn't kill you first. What are you going to do now, Psy Killer? Do you want to kill me with your own hands? No, my powers are there to support the players or the victims who take revenge if the pentagram is not filled. That means you are not doing anything to me directly? Exactly, and you can breathe a sigh of relief. The hour is over. Your victims will no longer chase you, and the other player didn't manage to kill you in the time either. The other player? Linus asked, confused. Yes, you are not the only player. Some have downloaded and launched Psy Killer. A few before you, of course. One of them was already on a higher level than you, so he tried a creative kill on you with your sister. With that, he could have unlocked even more skills. What? You did that to my sister because someone else wanted it? That's true. That's why I framed your sister. To lure you into a trap. The player really wanted to make a creative kill and did choose you. He had seen your stream and thought it was a perfect opportunity. Then she wasn't in danger? No, she wasn't. and since the other player has failed, he now has to fight for an hour to survive himself. Then are we free now? We can continue to live our lives normally? I took back the influence on your sister, and the other player has to fight for survival himself. If that is what you mean. But if he survives and wants revenge or someone else thinks you are a worthwhile victim, it will of course start all over again. In addition, her house is burning down and the police will probably be interested in your scream. This means we are only out of danger for the time being. I have to be careful from now on? You could say that, but now I have to get on my way again. There are other players to support. See you, answered the dark figure and dissolved. Linus fell to his knees. He was totally exhausted and needed medical attention. First, he could take a breather. He hoped that the first encounter with this being was also the last, but inwardly he was prepared for the danger hanging over him, like the sword of Damocles.